The problem of English. I believe at some level, virtually all of us struggle with the written language. Many of us struggle with learning how to spell, or we still have spelling words that we mistype and misspell when we're writing. Other people struggle deeply with learning how to read. And most English speakers still have questions about the language, valid questions about words, such as, why is there a silent final E in have? Why doesn't it say have? I believe most English speakers are also frustrated by the fact that we have been told it's an exception to virtually all our questions about words. Rather than our teachers saying, I don't know the answer, I'll go look it up and I'll find the linguistic reason, we've been told that there are no answers, and therefore most English speakers feel hopeless. We feel like we just have to rotely memorize and that it's this enormous task to become fluent readers and spellers of the English language. I think, too, most of us harbor this secret desire that English would be like other, maybe Eastern European languages, where one letter stands for one sound, and that we would learn to read and spell more easily, which is correct. In those languages, second graders decode and spell at the same level as college students. So we have this language with all these unanswered questions, which has created a lot of frustration at all levels of society. This has been shown to me through many people, one of whom is Jack Blackburn. Jack Blackburn approached me at a professional conference. He had tears in his eyes, and he said, I just read parts of Uncovering the Logic of English, and I realized I had deep shame about reading and spelling. All these years I've struggled, and I've never wanted to tell anyone, and I've discovered why. I discovered that the symbols on the page, they represent sounds and not words. And I discovered that there's a code, that I could break that code and that I didn't have to rotely memorize. He went on to say that every year he tutors a fourth grade boy who's struggling in school. And he said, you know what? Every single one of those boys, they're struggling with reading. And you know what else? Every single one of them is a gearhead like me. We hate exceptions. We like to figure out how things work. We want to understand. Jack is not alone. In the United States, we are experiencing a literacy crisis. 2/3 of all fourth graders read below grade level. That means a majority of our students are struggling with the skill that is most basic to academics, reading. In fact, 1/3 of fourth graders are functionally illiterate. They can't read for meaning. The statistics are not much better in 8th grade. In 8th grade, 25% of students are reading at below basic, which means they're functionally illiterate. But still, a full 2/3 of 8th graders are reading below grade level. It's unacceptable in our nation, I believe, that so many students are struggling with this basic skill. It doesn't get much better in adulthood either, because what we discover is that a full 49% of the adult population reads at the lowest 2 levels of literacy. This means they can sign their name and they can locate a feature in a sports article, but they can't read the newspaper for meaning. And only 3% of the adult population reads at the highest levels of literacy. This was tested using documents to serve on a jury. The literacy crisis is affecting the entire English-speaking world. This is not limited to the United States. It is going on in any country where English is the primary language. So why is this happening? What has gone wrong? I think to look at some of the answers, we need to look at how we were taught to read. In the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, there was an educational reform movement where we moved from phonics education, which wasn't answering some of our questions about the language, which we'll get to in a few moments, to sight words. And in sight word education, the belief is that we should teach students to read words, not sounds. Therefore, the teacher would hold up a sign that says run, and she would say to the class, this says run. And then they would read books such as Dick and Jane, where there's very repetitive, such as run, run, run. See Dick, run. The concept here was that students would be memorizing the whole word, and this is how they would become fluent readers. This method is still prevalent today in the Dolch list. The Dolch list is used across our nation and is often the first place that kindergartners and first graders begin reading in their school experience. Here, the students memorize again the words. But there's a problem. Human memory is limited to about 2,000 sight sound symbols. And when we consider how big the English language is, we have a problem. Do you know how many words there are in the English lexicon? There are 2 million and growing. In fact, the average adult speaker of English knows about 40 to 60,000 words. A well-educated adult can know 200,000 words. A student, when they arrive in school, knows about 10,000 words. So in order for that student to learn how to read enough words to become an average adult, knowing between about 40,000 words, they would have to have a stack of flashcards as high as a 7-story building. Can you imagine drilling your students for 12 years, 11 words a day, all those sight words? It's an impossible task. So the next movement that came along in education was whole language. And the idea of whole language was that the students were struggling with reading so deeply because those basal readers are so boring. Now, we have to talk about first some of the benefits of the whole language movement because we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Whole language led to a proliferation in children's literature. It also led to an understanding of the importance of reading to children from birth, and that children acquire vocabulary and all sorts of language structures from being read to. We also need to understand that whole language brings to us this very solid understanding that reading needs to be taught in the context of the whole language. We need to teach reading at the same time as handwriting and writing and literature and the concepts of story. But there is one myth that has permeated our culture from whole language, and this myth is that children learn to read naturally when they're read to and when they're surrounded by books. This myth is so pervasive that it's found on the back of cereal boxes and in parenting magazines, as well as in many education seminars. The idea is that if a child is struggling to read, the best thing we can do for them is to make it fun, to read to them a lot, and to require them to read. Now, the third reason I believe that most of us struggle so deeply with English is funny phonics. These are the rules that we were taught that have more exceptions than rule followers. So let me give you a few examples. Maybe you've heard this rule. When two vowels go walking, the first one does the talking. Let's look at a few words and see if this holds up. We have the word bread, where EA is saying eh. Then we have bead, where it's saying E. But what happens when we get to great? We'll need to tell kids, that's an exception. You'll have to memorize that one. Then we have ceiling, where the EI is saying E, and we get to a word like there, and we hear the long A sound, and once again, it's an exception. And then another word like feisty, another exception. Here's the only spelling rule that most English speakers know. Use I before E, except after C, or when they say A, as in neighbor and way. Maybe you've heard this one. Well, here's a list of all the exceptions. And we wonder, why are we struggling so deeply with this language and with learning how to read and spell? Sadly, it's the students who are logical thinkers and who recognize that the rules that they've been taught don't hold up, that they don't work, who often internalize one of two things. They internalize either, I hate reading and English is stupid, or I am stupid and there's something wrong with me because everybody else seems to be getting it but me. In reality, these students are observant and they see that the rules don't work. They're gifted. And if they were given the correct rules and with some proper guidance, they would have a foundation that they could rely on and that they could build the rest of their education upon. One of the mistakes that we often make when teaching English is to oversimplify the linguistic structure of the language, thinking that we're going to benefit our students if we oversimplify things. But in reality, we generate a lot of unnecessary confusion. Let's take a moment and look at the language a little bit more closely. Many of us know that English is a phonemic language. Phonemic refers to the study of sounds. Now, how many letters are there in the English alphabet? That's right, there are 26. Now, most of us were taught the 26 letters, so we might mistakenly believe that there are only 26 sounds. But how many sounds are there in English? There are 45. So you can immediately see that there's a discrepancy between the number of sounds and the number of letters in the alphabet, and that there's something more complex going on than a one-to-one correspondence. Did you know that there are actually 74 phonograms or sight sound symbols that represent those 45 sounds? So there's even more phonograms than there are sounds. English is a complex code, and we're going to need to tell students the reality of the code. So what are the vowels in English? Maybe you're thinking A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes Y, so 5 or 6. Well, in reality, there are 15 vowel sounds in English. And in fact, it's the vowels in English that create some of the huge problems in creating a written alphabet because we have so many vowels. There are some languages with only 5 vowel sounds. In English, though, there are 29 written vowels. Many of those have 2 or 3 or even 4 letters to represent one vowel sound. In addition to being a phonemic language, English is a morphophonemic language. So maybe this is a new term to you, morphophonemic. Morpho refers to the meaning of words. So the English code actually represents both sound and meaning. Let's look at a few examples of this, and later in this training we're going to dig deeply into morphology and its benefits to vocabulary development. But right now I want to give you a taste of this so that you can appreciate the beauty and the complexity of our language. Let's look at the word please first. In please, the EA phonogram is saying the long E sound. In pleasant, it is saying eh. Now notice please and pleasant are related in meaning. Therefore, when we decided how to spell this word, we had to make a choice. Would we represent the sound or would we represent the meaning? Well, since English is morphophonemic, there's a compromise that's made. We use the EA phonogram and we allow it to represent the E and the S sound, and then we retain the relationship in meaning that can be seen in the word so that we can clearly see that these are derivatives. Let's look at the word sign. Here we use a 2-letter N, and then in signature, a related derivative, we can clearly hear the G sound. And we can also clearly hear G in signal. And then we get to another derivative, design, and we hear just the N sound. So what you can gain from this is that the English code is representing sound and meaning. It is seeking to balance out the fact that these words have a relationship between one another and to represent their sounds. English is a complex code, and in order to teach it successfully, we need to teach our students that they're learning a morphophonemic language. There are 45 sounds, that there are 74 basic phonograms, there are 48 multi-letter phonograms, and that there's 30 spelling rules that interplay with these to describe the language. I'm on a mission to change how reading is taught in the English-speaking world and to ensure that all students learn to read. And I believe that part of that mission is changing how we think about English. Rather than being frustrated with our language and dismissive of it, we need to see the power of this complex code. Just like you can do more with calculus and higher level math than you can with basic addition and subtraction, a complex code has a lot more flexibility to it and creativity offered to it. In addition, in English, there are more synonyms than any language in the world. Just take a moment and think of the word big. How else can you say it? Huge, enormous, gigantic. All of these have shades of meaning and nuance. English is a highly nuanced language with a lot of definitions that communicate very fine detail. It's excellent for technical writing. And in addition, it's a multicultural language, which is wonderful. We can take words from other languages and import them into English and retain elements of that culture right within the English language. So how do we teach such a massive subject? The cultural-wide solution has been to focus on Dolch sight words. We ask students to memorize 100 words by first grade, 300 by third grade, and then we focus on reading comprehension right from kindergarten, wanting students to answer questions about the meaning of the text and what's happening within the text, even before we teach them what the symbols on the page are exactly representing. So what is the solution to the literacy crisis? I believe it's to teach smart. I believe that we can transform reading in this generation by teaching the 74 phonograms and the 30 spelling rules that logically explain 98% of English words. By doing this, we're going to provide students answers to their questions about words, and this will allow them to build on that knowledge and then to be able to read with comprehension. I believe it's also important that we focus on the 1,000 most frequently used words that comprise 65% of all printed material. You see, whether you're reading a children's book or a doctoral dissertation, you need words like is, that, he, she, it, all those grammatical terms, and those words comprise 65% of all those books at all those levels because they're what hold a sentence together. When we teach these words and the phonograms and spelling rules and how they apply to these words, we give students the tools to begin to read anything. In addition, after that, it just becomes about vocabulary development in your subject area and learning the vocabulary needed to comprehend science and history and math. We also need to teach Latin roots because Latin roots explain 90% of multisyllable words. When we know the rules and phonograms, we have clues about how a word is to be pronounced, what word it is. But when we know roots, we have clues to the meaning of words that we don't know the meaning of already. We'll be experiencing some of this shortly in the training. It is also important that we take a unified approach to teaching reading and spelling. As it currently stands, oftentimes students get a different message about reading in kindergarten, where the teacher might begin with sight words, from first grade, where they may do more phonics, to second grade, where they may learn to spell by saying the letter names. Table spells table. It's important instead that teachers across the grades and across the subjects approach reading and spelling in the same way so as to not generate unnecessary confusion. It's also important to understand that there are linguistic answers to our questions about words and that we should be giving those answers to students no matter what subject that they're in. In this way, we reinforce how the language works and we can work together as a team. It's also important that we train all of our teachers in K through 12, no matter what their subject, because all subject teachers are also teaching vocabulary. And as we'll see in the morphology sections, we can greatly improve students' retention of those vocabulary words and ability to spell them when we know how the language works. I believe it's also important to train parents. I think that in order to reverse the literacy crisis, we cannot just focus on children. We need to focus on all generations. We need to provide parents the answers to why a word is read and spelled in a particular way. So when that student is doing homework at home or reading aloud to their parent, that the parent can reinforce the correct answers as well. In this way, we can also begin to change the knowledge of that generation so that their questions about reading and spelling can also be answered. When I train schools, I always encourage schools to hold a parent meeting as well the evening that we have the teacher in service, and to invite parents and to invite the community to learn a bit more about the rules and the phonograms and about reading and spelling. Finally, we need to unify mainstream classrooms with what's happening in our remedial reading classrooms. As it currently stands, oftentimes the way that reading and spelling are taught in the mainstream classroom differs from the way it's taught in remedial reading. Many remedial reading programs will use some form of the Orton-Gillingham method, which explains the rules and phonograms, and then students go back to the mainstream classroom and they're told it's about words or about syllables, or using some other approach. However, when the mainstream classroom is the place that the real content about how the language is taught is introduced, and remedial reading teachers are there to provide reinforcement and extra practice and clarification for those students who need more time with the content, then everyone can succeed. And we don't need to reserve this information only for the students who fall below the 10th percentile. I'd like to share a story with you that illustrates both the problem of English and the hope that the solutions offer. My friend Katie met a woman named Allie on an airplane. As Katie and Allie were speaking, it came out that Allie really struggles with reading. And during that conversation, she described herself as stupid about 5 times. Allie, in fact, struggled so deeply with reading that she would struggle to even read a recipe and would often have her children read it aloud to her. Now, Katie gave Allie a copy of Uncovering the Logic of English, and I thought, well, that's crazy. I wrote Uncovering the Logic of English for teachers. I wrote it for parents. I wrote it for people who know how to read to help those who don't know how to read. But Allie took uncovering the logic of English. She took the tables and she taught herself the phonograms. She taught herself the sounds that those phonograms make. And then she read the book and she taught herself the rules and the spelling rules and how those rules explain English words. Allie then emailed me a few months ago that she had read her first novel. She said she read Nicholas Sparks and she understood it and she comprehended it and she really enjoyed it. Because now the words didn't look like the blah, 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 he, blah, blah, blah. But she could read and she could decode all the words and enjoy the story. So as we progress, I want you to think about these stories of Jack and of Allie. I want you to consider how the rules and phonograms, as we learn them, affect you, how they answer the questions that you've had. And before we dig into those rules and phonograms, I actually want to maybe expose the issue a little more deeply for yourself. So we're going to take a spelling quiz. Now, this is going to be just like in school. I'm going to read a word, and then I just want you to take a moment and to write it down. You can write it on page 27 of your teacher's training manual. Note as you write them any words that you struggled with. Also pay attention. Did you feel badly? Was there any sense of shame or uncomfortable feelings? Because this will help you to identify with your students. Word 1, miscellaneous. I have a few miscellaneous parts that you can use. Miscellaneous. Number 2, acceptable. This revision is acceptable. Acceptable. Number 3, changeable. The circumstance is changeable. Number 4, committed. We are committed to solving the problem. Committed. Number 5, humorous. Tom told a humorous joke. Humorous. Number 6, intelligence. The horse displayed great intelligence in that race. Intelligence. Number 7, misspell. This word is easy to misspell. Misspell. Number 8, noticeable. I hope my mistake wasn't noticeable. Noticeable. Number 9, accidentally. The man accidentally tripped and spilled his coffee. Accidentally. Number 10, business. They opened a new business in our town. Business. Number 11, mysterious. What a mysterious letter I received today. Mysterious. Number 12, immobilize. The physician needed to immobilize his leg. Immobilize. Number 13, prescient. The author was prescient of the events. Prescient. Also sometimes said prescient. Number 14, synchronization. They danced with perfect synchronization. Synchronization. Number 15, campaign. The presidential campaign is in full swing. Campaign.